Hi guys, welcome to session 20 of Marketing 102. My name is Yankit Chan, and in this series we are going to start with the new P of marketing, which is the place and the distribution. As you know, traditionally in a marketing process there are four P's. You start with the product, then you have price, then you have place and distribution, and then you have the promotion. So in this video we are going to start with the yet another important aspect of marketing, which is the place and the distribution. Now, when we talk about place, what do we mean? We basically mean the channels and distributions through which a manufacturer makes sure that its products are available to the consumer. So, when we talk about marketing activity, we know that it is consumer driven. The products are created which are the need of the consumer, and then you have to provide these goods, these services to the consumer. The process of providing these goods to the consumer to make sure that it's available to the consumer, that process is called place and distribution. That is the channels and the distribution process. Now, when we talk about place, we basically means moving the product from the producer to the intended user. So we use a lot of channels, we use a lot of route through which the goods move from the source or the factory to the final user. I'm sure you must have heard about wholesalers, retailers, agents, intermediaries. All these are part of the channels and distribution. Now, as far as the services are concerned, when we talk about place in context of services, we need to make sure that the service providers are available to the consumer. For goods, it is very easy to understand the concept of distribution, but for the services, it is there is no physical goods involved. For services, the person who is providing the service, that is the service provider, he has to be available to the customer. So, in order to provide that service provider or to connect that service provider with the consumer, that is the concept of place with the context of service. Now, with the advancement in the technology, there are a lot of companies who are using a direct selling mode to the customers. There are a lot of intermediaries which are providing these services to the companies that they can directly connect with the consumer. So this direct selling and online selling is a fairly recent concept. But before this, before the internet has penetrated deep, the companies were used to have those physical distribution system. Now, the flow of goods may mean its physical distribution or the transfer of the title of ownership. So, when we understand the definition of place from the point of view of Philip Kotler, so he describes the place and distribution by the physical distribution. But when we understand the place, the concept of place through through the uh, eyes of other marketing gurus, they define this place as the concept of transfer of title, that is the transfer of ownership. Now, for us, for this particular chapter, the place and distribution is more about the physical distribution. So, who are the participants in the distribution system? So, you start with the manufacturer. Obviously, these are those people who produce the goods. Then you have the intermediaries. Now, intermediaries are basically the middleman who act as a bridge between the buyers and the sellers. So, they direct negotiate with the buyers and they directly negotiate with the seller. Then you have facilitating agencies. Now, as the name suggests, these are agencies which are facilitating every person involved in this distribution channel. So they make sure that the distribution goods is smooth. So you have a lot of banking services, you have a lot of insurance services, then you have a lot of logistical services. All these people are facilitating agencies. And then you have the final channel, that is the consumer itself, where the good has its final resting place. That is the final destination for goods. Now, before we go into deep that what are the distribution channels, let us understand their function. So when we talk about the functions of distribution channel, there are three primary functions which are performed by any distribution channel. So they start with transactional function, logistical function, and facilitating function. So let's go through this function one by one. So when we talk about the transactional function, we are basically involved with the transaction. So when we purchase goods and services, what is the transaction? So transaction is buying, transaction is selling, and the transaction is risk bearing. Now why we call it a risk bearing, we'll come to it in a bit. So what is buying? So basically a manufacturer produces a good and the intermediaries buy these goods from the manufacturers. Now when an intermediary buys these goods, that intermediary is willingly involved in this process. So the willingness to involve and the willingness to take the risk has to be there, otherwise the transaction cannot happen. And then these intermediaries, they sell these goods to the local level, that is either to the retailers or to directly to the consumer. Now, as you can clearly see that the intermediaries are also bearing a risk. That is, what if the goods are not approved by the government? What if there is a change in the policy of the government which make those goods obsolete? What if there is a change in the trend while that transaction is happening? So therefore, that risk bearing happens for every level of this transaction function. That is, the manufacturer is also bearing a risk by selling his good to the intermediaries. What is the risk to the manufacturer? That what if intermediaries reverse engineer his good and start his own brand? The risk bearing for the intermediaries is that what if there is a change in the laws, there is a change in the policy of the government which make those goods obsolete? And what is the risk for the consumer? That maybe intermediary is not available after sale. So we have to make sure that the gap between the production and the consumption is fulfilled. And that gap is fulfilled by the transaction function. That is, all participants in the distribution channel must assume some risk of loss. Otherwise, the transaction cannot happen. The third function is logistical function. Now, logistical function is actually physically transporting your goods from the place of its manufacture to the place of its consumption. That is, when the goods are produced by the manufacturer, they have to be delivered physically to the consumer. That delivery process happens through the logistical function. Now, it is not just simple transportation. Yes, transportation is a big part of logistical function. But before that, there is assembling process. So what happens in assembling? In assembling, basically, where the goods are manufactured at 10 different places. These people who perform logistical function, they make sure that all those goods which are being manufactured at 10 different places, they are assembled in a common location. So it refers to keeping the goods at a particular place. Then you have the function of grading, sorting. So these functions are important because they make sure that the appropriate goods are available to the appropriate customer. So the handling and sale of goods happen promptly. This is made sure by the grading and packaging facilities. And then you have the transportation itself. So also before transportation, we have the storage function. So storage function, again, we have studied this in the past, that there is a time gap between when the goods are manufactured and when the goods are consumed. So in between this time, the goods have to be kept somewhere. And because a lot of goods are perishable in nature, so for those type of goods, the storage function becomes very important. So the storage function, it helps the prevention of loss due to damage, and it also makes sure that the goods are in regular supply to the consumer, because the manufacturing process is happening every day and the consumption process is also happening every day. So there might be a chance that there is a mismatch between the manufacturing items and the consumption items. So this gap, or this, you can say, this deficit of items may not happen. Storage function makes sure that appropriate inventory is maintained, so that even if the manufacturer is not able to manufacture those appropriate amount of quantities, still the products are available to the consumer. And then finally you have the transportation function. Now basically, logistical function is all about transportation, but as we have studied, it is not. But transportation is the important part, because transportation function makes sure that the goods reach to that location where the buyer is actually located. Otherwise, you can make a very good product. You can price it very appropriately. You can promote your product to the best of your ability with the best within your budget. But it won't matter unless and until those goods are made available to the buyer. The final primary function of the distribution channel is the facilitating function. Now, facilitating function is like a support function for the logistic and the transactional function. So, every kind of post-purchase services or maintenance, or providing the finance to the consumer so that they can buy, or providing the marketing information, they are the key function of facilitating function. See, you have to facilitate the process. Now, how do you facilitate the process? The most important part is the finance. I'm sure you must have heard about financing options by a lot of banks, that in if you do not have money, so your consumption should not stop. So the banks come into the picture and they give you finance. Then you're looking for information to buy a product. So there are a lot of websites who are providing you the marketing information, that what are the features of a product. And then you have a post purchase services. So that for, especially for the electronic items, they require a lot of post purchase services because they may get damaged, or the consumer might not have appropriate information how to use those products. So all these functions are performed under the facilitating function. The most important aspect of facilitating function is the flow of information. So the manufacturer should be able to contact with the seller should be able to contact the consumer, so that that flow of information happens. Otherwise, all the individuals, all the elements of our marketing will be working blindly if the flow of information is not there. So there won't be a contact between the manufacturer and the seller. So manufacturer would not know how much to produce, and the seller would not tell that when the goods will be coming. Similarly, for the customer, that what kind of goods are available in the market. So the flow of information is very important, and that flow of information is performed by the facilitating function. And the financial assistance function is also there, specially performed by the bank, which they give you goods on finance. So this finishes up our primary function. Now, other than primary function, there are two secondary functions also. So let's go through them one by one. So first of all, you have the product promotion. And now what is product promotion? Promotion, I'm sure you already know. So when you advertise and promote your product, that is, you make the consumer aware that this is our product, this is the feature, and this is the price. So in this process, not only the manufacturers involved, but also the intermediaries are involved, because intermediaries will tell the manufacturer that okay, consumer want this kind of product. So if your product has this feature, then you should promote that feature. So with the help of demonstration of the product, display, and contest, I'm sure you must receive samples of those tiny samples of a new product. All that is a part of product promotion. And finally, you have the negotiations. Now, negotiation basically happens between the manufacturer and the consumer before a deal is struck. So, basically, what kind of quality of product I want, what is my budget, what is the timeline, all those things are decided in the negotiation process. With this, we finishes up our functions of distribution channel. I hope you like this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.